Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving and got to spend time with friends and family. I had a great Thanksgiving weekend. I feel well rested and ready to do more podcasting. So without any further delay, let's jump into this week's show. Starting October 13th, a public inquiry into the Trudeau government's unprecedented use of the Emergencies Act during the Freedom Convoy protests last winter will begin public hearings. Dozens of witnesses are expected to take the stand, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and prominent convoy organizers like Tamara Lich and Barber. Recall that the Trudeau government invoked the Emergencies Act on February 14th to evict trucks and protesters who were in downtown Ottawa. They were protesting the federal government's vaccine mandates for travel and for the civil service, provincial lockdowns, and other restrictions. The emergency measures granted police extraordinary temporary powers to clear people out of downtown Ottawa and allowed banks to freeze the accounts of some of those who had donated to the protests. This commission is the only opportunity Canadians will have for what we hope to be an impartial inquiry into the circumstances that led the Trudeau government to invoke the Emergencies Act. Only the fourth time in Canada's history, and only the second in peacetime, that a government of Canada has invoked these incredibly draconian powers that curtailed our civil liberties. As we know, as I mentioned earlier, it led to the freezing of bank accounts of people who had given just a few bucks to the convoy, and the convoy itself was removed forcibly as snipers and helicopters patrolled. I was there witnessing all of this, and I hadn't seen anything like this in real life except in the movies. Now, the law under which the emergency was invoked requires the government to set up this commission, which will look at whether the government's rationale for invoking the emergency made sense. This commission should not be confused with the parliamentary committee, which is also tasked with looking at the emergency. Now, that committee splits on partisan lines and dominated by the Liberal NDP alliance. So we know already they're not going to find anything wrong happened. Our best hope really is this independent commission. Today's guest has a great deal to say about the work of this commission and is possibly even speaking before the commission as it gathers testimony. Please welcome Eva Chipiuk to the show. She is an Edmonton-based lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and worked with Keith Wilson, another lawyer who represented the Freedom Convoy protests, and they both more recently represented Brian Peckford's challenge to the federal vaccine mandate for travel. So please welcome Eva to the show. Hey Eva, welcome to my show. So I wanted to chat with you about the upcoming Public Order Emergency Commission. I saw you tweeting the other day, and you said that the Public Order Emergency Commission is a great opportunity for Canadians to watch our democracy in action and to learn as the testimony proceeds that the Freedom Convoy protesters were not, as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau alleged, were a bunch of racists and misogynists, but in fact were a diverse group of Canadians from many different backgrounds and with different backgrounds and beliefs. All of them, and I spoke to many of the protesters there who were there, believed in our civil liberties and individual rights. As someone like you who was both involved with the Freedom Convoy protests, and originally I believe you were going to be a counsel for the convoy at the commission, and now I think you're appearing in your own personal capacity. Could you tell our viewers and listeners what the significance of this commission is and why you think it's important?
Of course. And Rupa, it's so nice to hear what you have to say. And I understand you live in Ottawa and we're quite close to where the protests were taking place. Mm-hmm. And so it's exactly the kind of evidence that we are really hoping that the Commission and the rest of Canada will hear is exactly what you were talking about, is that it was really a diverse variety of Canadians that really came together for a common cause to the nation's capital here in Ottawa. And I was here for 3 weeks. It was really amazing to see. And as you alluded to, that is what we are hoping to see the commission do, to hear exactly what happened, what brought people here. There was a reason that people felt compelled to come all the way to Ottawa in the dead of winter. There was a reason that there was incredible support for people coming across. We saw the videos as truckers and regular Canadians just got involved and started driving from their hometowns. There was financial support, as we all know. So what compelled these people to come, these Canadians to come to Ottawa, stick it out in the dead of winter and support one another in a way I honestly have never, ever seen in my lifetime before. And we really hope that the commission will hear that and Canada will have an opportunity to hear that as well.
So, Eva, just to clarify, what was your involvement with the Freedom Convoy protests back in February? What was the nature of your involvement?
So I'm legal counsel with the Justice Centre.
Okay.
And the Justice Centre was contacted by certain protesters that were in Ottawa. Mm-hmm. They reached out to the Justice Centre, and that's how I got involved. We got to Ottawa on the request of, we still represent Tamara Lich, Barber, and some of the other volunteers that came together, the protesters that were here early on the ground. Yeah. And we were retained as legal counsel to help navigate any legal issues that were to arise, give advice. As we all know, protesting peacefully, peaceful assembly and right of expression is guaranteed under the charter. And so we were just ensuring that those guarantees remain, and that if there's any hurdles or challenges legally, that we're here to support the protesters.
What was your experience like in the initial days of the protest at the very early on, from a legal point of view? What is it that you experienced? What is it that you saw as a lawyer unfolding as the days, as the protesters became increasingly more entrenched in the downtown core?
Well, honestly, I think we've used the word unprecedented for the protest and what occurred in Ottawa many times. We've heard that word used numerously, and I would have to say that it's the same with any legal challenges and legal issues that we came across. Nothing about the protest and these clients and the legal issues we faced is anything I've ever seen before. We flew in thinking, we're going to be faced with an injunction from the city of Ottawa. That seemed to make sense to us, and that would be, we suspected that would be something we would have to defend in court early on. That didn't occur. We were served with an injunction by a private citizen for honking. So we had that challenge. Throughout the time, there were different legal actions, some by the city, one by the province, both of which were not served on us. Those were ex parte orders. So the party, the city and the province went to court and asked for an order from the judge without notifying us. Who identified, we identified early on to the public that we were on the ground and retained to support and provide legal advice and represent protesters.
Did you at all imagine, like I have said this many times, I didn't think that the protesters would be here beyond the weekend, but did you at all think that they would stay here as long as they did?
Not at all. And we got in here after the weekend. So,
okay.
There's that answer. Yeah. And when we came not knowing how long we were coming for and when we were heading back.
Yeah.
So we were in the same boat, and even more so because we only got tidbits from what we saw on social media or the news, and we weren't really here to see what it was. Once you get here, once we got here, you could really see what was going on and get a real feel for reality of what was on the ground, and all the work and all, again, the support that was going on here, and people working together, again, like I've never seen before.
I mean, it may sound like a dumb question, but typically with protest movements, do they typically normally retain lawyers or a legal team when they're about to protest or engage in civil disobedience?
I'm going to use the word unprecedented again. Okay. To be honest, I don't know if they reach out, and at some point, probably they do. Yeah. I don't know if they generally have them on the ground.
Okay.
I would suspect not. So this is, kudos to the clients to recognize, especially because of the magnitude and the chaos that was going on around them. I think they recognized early on that I think we need a little bit of legal advice here to make sure and help guide us throughout this time.
Yeah, I was struck by the fact that, that's when I first met Keith Wilson, and that, they had the convoy organizers had a legal team in place, and that legal team was there at all of these pressers that I attended during the 3 weeks that the protesters were here. And I've attended my fair share of protests around the world, but I'd never seen, a legal team at any of these protests. So that was quite striking at that time. But as you say, they were forward looking and they anticipated problems, and so it was. Good on them for having a legal team in place in case anything were to come up.
And just to put note on that is that wasn't organized really either at all. We were contacted, I think it was Tuesday. Yeah. Yes, Tuesday, 4 p.m. We then got the go ahead to go to Ottawa 10 p.m. We were on a plane 5 a.m. the next day. Nothing was pre-planned, pre-organized. Grassroots, it was what I loved and I noticed about what was going on in Ottawa is it seemed that when there was a need for something, that area of expertise or that requirement just appeared. People volunteered. They wanted to be there. They wanted to support. I felt compelled to help just as much as somebody else coming to serve soup or provide some warm clothes. I knew that this was an area I could help in. We were called, didn't hesitate. I know Keith Wilson was the same. Neither of us hesitated to, within less than 24 hours from first contact, we were in Ottawa.
Yeah. So what do you personally hope to accomplish by being involved in the commission, either attending as part of the public or if you're called as a witness yourself?
Definitely, it's all about the truth. So one thing people have been asking questions about or with the commission is, what is it going to accomplish? One thing I did mention in the tweet is it isn't meant to be an adversarial process. The inquiry. It's meant to be an inquisitorial process, a fact-finding evidence process for 6 weeks. After that, there's 1 week of policy. So the intent and the goal of the commission is to get all of the information, the evidence out. So that's 6 weeks. And then after that, and all parties can do this as well, is make pitches to the commission basically about what they suggest change with the Emergencies Act and provide recommendations and policy review after that portion. So it's about getting to the truth, really. That's the goal. That's what I really hope will happen for the next 6-7 weeks, is we get down to the nitty-gritty truth of what went on in Ottawa in February.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard of the Parliamentary Committee, which, and unlike the Parliamentary Committee, which is also looking into the Emergencies Act, the Parliamentary Committee is stacked with this Liberal NDP alliance. So we all hope that this independent commission, headed by a non-partisan judge, will be impartial, will be fair, and examine all points of view, and not just those coming from the government side. From your experience, both as a lawyer and based on previous public inquiries we've had in Canada on a range of different issues, what's the likelihood that the Commission will actually find the government at fault here? And I've talked about this many, many times on my show before, that courts in Canada generally tend to be very deferential to the government of the day. And I wonder if a similar deference also would extend to independent commissions like this.
So I'm going to touch on one thing, and that you might have to remind me of the question again, but I did want to mention one thing is, I've heard a lot of people also, compare to the House of Commons parliamentary sessions. From what I know, I don't believe the witnesses are under oath. They may be there at the inquiry. They will be, and there will be an opportunity to be cross-examined, which there you do see similarly. So there is a little bit different of a process. So that's one thing I wanted to point out, because there has been a lot of questions about that. And, while some members of parliament, I've watched some of those sessions, excellent questions are being posed. But here there's going to be a bit more opportunity for experienced civil litigators to cross-examine these witnesses under oath. At question period, that's another one that I've seen some comparisons. I believe those are all generally pre-written, the questions, and so the other party has an opportunity to have a prepared answer. That's not the case here. Okay. So it will be a little bit more, you have to think on your feet. You have to tell the truth. You're under oath. And so we'll see how the witnesses act in that case. And we have a wide variety now that have been shown.
But so the question really was just because you said to remind you of the question. The courts generally tend to be deferential to the government's views, and we've seen how all of these challenges to the vaccine mandates or lockdowns or restrictions over the course of the last couple of years have just not really succeeded. So I'm wondering, should we expect a similar kind of deference from a public commission of this sort?
Yeah, really good question. And I have to say, no. I've been involved in some of the challenges in court, and public health advice is a bit different than what we're looking at here. Okay. I can understand courts being deferential to public health advice, especially in a time where a lot isn't known. Courts generally do say, I'm not the expert. So I can understand to an extent where they're coming up, why they're saying that. That's not what they're meant. They don't have the expertise to be making this kind of decision about public health. They are legal experts and looking at the law. So I understand why they're being deferential. There is a team of medical doctors and advisors to the government. So, it's kind of one judge against a big team of medical experts. Yeah. Here, we're not saying the same thing. It's a different scenario. The commission is very supported. The Judge Rouleau is a commissioner in this case, and he has a big support of people with expertise, and he's able to get advice from a variety of people. And the second is, was a government only decision, I think. And while there was some advice, or that's questionable, because we've heard a lot of whether or not and how much the government got advice on enacting the Emergencies Act. That's going to be a central question to the inquiry. So I don't think we can compare the two. They are, for many reasons, distinct.
Okay. So hypothetically, if the commission were to find that the government made a mistake invoking the Emergency Act, because it didn't meet the threshold of an immediate threat to public safety. Are there any consequences for the government? As I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Commission cannot actually do anything except file a report with which the government can just put on a shelf, right? Is that correct?
Yes. In a short answer, yes.
Okay.
And this is why we really are encouraging Canadians to watch and appraise the evidence, the situation with their own hands, hear the evidence, hear what is being said. And, there is also, as we know, the court of public opinion. Exactly. If everyone in Canada hears, really what happened on the ground, the facts, they hear whether or not they believe the government was justified in doing it. The court of public opinion has a lot of weight, and it ought to. The government works for us. It's an opportunity, if you think that what you heard at the Commission is important and you believe that it wasn't properly invoked, and maybe that's what the Commissioner decides, you could then write to your MP. I think we need to start in Canada being a bit more vocal, maybe to the politicians, about things we want to see and want to hear from our elected officials.
Yeah, I mean, that's a point that I've been trying to make as well over the last few months, and hopefully more people are thinking along those lines. But, back to the Commission, do you believe this Commission could potentially be a game changer, especially if they find anything irregular in the way the emergency was declared? Could that create legal troubles for the government? For example, even if this Commission files a report and it has no teeth, I assume that the report could be the basis for future lawsuits against the government. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, well, it's really hard to say now about what can transpire after. Definitely, like you said, will it have teeth? And I think a lot, again, has to do with public opinion. If it doesn't, then how do, as Canadians, we make it known that, we need teeth, we need this Commission to be heard? Possibly it could lead to lawsuits, but it's really hard to say right now. What can transpire. It really will depend. Tomorrow is the first day. We're going to get a little insight into how things are going. As a lawyer, I do believe in the rule of law, and I have to believe that everything is going to be proper until we know otherwise.
Yeah. So do we know when the Prime Minister is expected to take the stand?
No. So a list has been made public now, and it's still not known. I think that's something we're going to start to figure out shortly here in the next couple of days. Yeah. One thing I can tell you is lawyers are terrible at estimating. So that's going to be one challenging component of all of this. I believe there's about 80 lawyers that are involved for all parties. So it's a bit of a logistical nightmare, I believe, for the Commission to be sorting this out and then having an idea of the witnesses. I suspect, and it would make sense if the Prime Minister and the federal government's evidence comes a bit later in the game, because, that's when the Emergencies Act was invoked at the end. So that would make sense to me.
80 lawyers, that's quite extraordinary. Is that again, to use the word, unprecedented? And is this the biggest public inquiry that we've had in recent times?
Possibly one of the biggest, but it is definitely is one that's happening at the speed of light. Okay. So that is one of the requirements that resulted from the Emergencies Act. Invoking it, you need to set up an inquiry process and have a report by February 20th, which is the day it was revoked. So that part is definitely something I don't think we've seen before. This is the first time with the new Emergencies Act, with this requirement in it, that this process is being put into place. So the amount of information and all of that. So as for 80 lawyers, that I couldn't tell you. It is
Mm-hmm.
very big. This
Mm-hmm.
is something of national importance and significance. So
Yeah.
there are, I believe, 20 parties, some of whom have 2
Yeah.
or 4 lawyers.
Okay. Interesting. Well, Eva, I've run out of questions. Is there anything you want to tell our viewers and listeners? What do you want them to do as far as the commission is concerned? Any suggestions, any advice, any requests?
Yeah, like I said, definitely we want
Yeah.
Canadians to tune in. And
Okay.
I understand that some Canadians are feeling, maybe this is not going to be a fair process.
Yeah.
But it's an opportunity for not only to hear, but also to be heard. The
Mm-hmm.
commission is taking submissions until the end of October. We encourage everyone,
Yeah.
to submit. You could contact us if you want some, help, or you don't know where to send it to, but it's on
Yeah.
the commission's website.
Okay.
The commission needs to hear from Canadians. This is about Canada, like I said, national and significance that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
We have to start making our voices heard. I think that's why people ended up here to begin with. They weren't heard, and Canadians need to be heard. And it's time for people to come together, talk to your elected officials. That is what they are for. If you have concerns, questions, address it to them, and maybe that'll help with resolving things at some point. But I did want to turn it a little bit over to you again, because I did want to hear, I think it's important that Canadians hear what you saw and what people in Ottawa saw as well. And you did start with that, and I wouldn't mind closing with a little bit more from you.
Well, yeah, I what I saw was quite extraordinary, start to finish, and I didn't expect it to unfold the way it did. I didn't expect the protesters to be here as long as they were here for, and it was quite extraordinary. Like I said, I've been to a lot of protests in my life, overseas especially. I'm originally from India, and it's a land of civil disobedience. And I've seen my fair share of protests, but I've never seen anything quite like this, which was very inclusive, which was very peaceful. It was very joyful. It was great. I'd come home and I would look at tweets from the CBC and CTV, and they had a completely different take on what was happening, very contrary to what I had experienced. And I kept tweeting about it, and I eventually wrote about it. And I think that was, I feel like it was an important contribution to at that time and a necessary corrective to what I felt was a very corrosive narrative that had unfolded in trying to portray the protesters and the truckers as just evil people, and which they were not. In fact, the only bad experience I had at the protest was from a counter-protester who confronted me and was very aggressive. But I could have behaved like I was like the world's biggest victim, but I chose not to. Everybody has their right to air their opinions and views, and I respected this individual's right to do that. But no, this was an important moment, Eva, in our country's history. A very important time, as you say correctly, that these are people who came to the streets because they weren't being heard. And this was the only way to get heard. And they would say, "Well, we're honking because we just want to be heard." It was a cry for help in some ways. Please hear us. We just want to have a conversation. And I think that was unfortunate that I kept hoping that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau would see that, and eventually speak to at least the organizers of the protest, or at least address the protesters, given he does that kind of thing when protests happen in other countries, but it's unfortunate it didn't happen. But here we are. I'm hoping that the commission takes into account all of these different viewpoints and comes to a fair and impartial conclusion. And as you say, it's hugely important that Canadians tune in and make their voices heard, and because it's time to be heard, I think.
And so I really love and appreciate hearing that from you, and that is really what we want Canada to hear. And one point you made is what you heard is, peace and love and unity. Where did the divisiveness and that rhetoric come from? From what I heard, never once from the protesters. And I could be wrong, of course. There might be some bad apples here or there.
Yeah.
But exactly what you said is the Prime Minister didn't come out and speak to the protesters. What did he do? He kind of almost egged them on a little bit more, calling them a fringe minority, which they embraced wholeheartedly, as you know, and should we tolerate their views, racist, misogynist. So where did that rhetoric come from? Who is really the one perpetuating this divisiveness in this country? And I think that we really need to get to the bottom of that. And that's what I believe will happen in the next 6-7 weeks.
Well, I hope so too. I think it's an important time. It's a time of healing, and also accountability. We shouldn't forget accountability, which has been completely lacking so far. And I hope we get to the bottom of what exactly happened February of this past year. Well, Eva, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It's been a great pleasure. I loved having this conversation with you. Good luck at the commission, and I hope to see you there.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to come back anytime, Rupa.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Take care.